Hey everyone, welcome back to Global Power Pulse. Today we're diving into a massive explainer on how a complete paradigm shift in drone technology is literally rewriting the rules of global conflicts right before our eyes. To kick things off, I want you to imagine for a second that you're a mobilized soldier being sent to the front lines. You've been told you're part of a grand breakthrough, right? But as you step into the trenches of Stepnohirsk, there's a stark, terrifying number hanging over your head that you just can't ignore. 12 minutes. That is the current average survival time for a Russian soldier in that sector. It's an absolutely chilling reality, and it's the clearest sign yet that Putin's traditional manpower strategy has officially hit a brick wall.
So, why is the front line turned into such a terrifying meat grinder? Well, it's largely because the very nature of battlefield casualties has fundamentally changed. In most modern wars, you'd expect maybe 2 or 3 wounded soldiers for every 1 death. But in this conflict, that ratio is completely flipped. Ukraine is reporting nearly 2 Russian deaths for every single wounded soldier. And the primary reason? FPV, or first-person view drones. These tiny, explosive-laden aircraft are now responsible for roughly 80% of Russian casualties. Because these drones are relentlessly targeting individual soldiers and evacuation teams, medical rescue has become so incredibly dangerous that units are often forced to simply leave their wounded behind on the battlefield.
Okay, let's map out exactly how this shift is playing out globally. We're going to cover the new rules of war, the collapse of Goliath in Eastern Europe, the Pacific's cardboard fleet, the asymmetric pivot in the Middle East, and finally, wrap it all up with the expendable warfare era.
First up, the new rules of war. We are officially moving away from massive, traditional armies and stepping directly into the era of cheap, lethal tech.
The contrast here is just staggering. For decades, traditional warfare was all about billion-dollar warships, massive S-400 air defense systems, and highly concentrated, super expensive military factories. But expendable warfare, it turns all of that entirely upside down. Today, the battlefield is defined by incredibly cheap cardboard drones and distributed civilian factories. You can't just bomb a single munitions plant to stop an army anymore when they can literally produce thousands of drones in ordinary packaging facilities overnight.
Moving into Section 2, the collapse of Goliath in Eastern Europe. Let's see how these new rules are actively dismantling traditional strategies on the ground in Ukraine.
So for over 3 years, the Kremlin has relied on a strategy of pure attrition, basically the idea that they can outlast Ukraine just by throwing more bodies at the problem. But the math is finally turning against them. In just the first 4 months of 2026, Russia saw nearly 130,000 of its soldiers killed or wounded. To put that into perspective, they lost 70,000 men in March and April alone. And here is where the wall comes in. Despite offering signing bonuses worth tens of thousands of dollars, their recruitment rate has dropped by about 20%. Even Dmitry Medvedev claims they're pulling in 27,000 contract soldiers a month. But when you're losing 35,000 men in that exact same time frame, you are in deep, net loss territory. Actually, for the first time since the Kursk operation back in 2024, Russia is losing more land than it's taking. And perhaps the wildest data point? Commanders admit that 90% of their losses are happening in the last mile of logistics before troops even reach the combat zone. It's gotten so bad they've stopped using armored vehicles because drones spot them instantly. Instead, they're desperately trying to move supplies on motorcycles and trailers, which offers absolutely zero protection.
We saw the direct result of this vulnerability in the village of Odradna. Now, Russia had held that area for 6 straight months as part of their steady gains narrative. But in a matter of days, Ukraine's 129th Brigade used a signature model to completely clear the village and surrounding forests. First, detailed drone mapping pinpoints the exact positions. Next, precision artillery and loitering munitions suppress those specific spots. And finally, small infantry groups advance. The Russian defense didn't just bend here, it completely shattered, with soldiers abandoning their posts and fleeing, and our sources note this is becoming a growing pattern across the front.
The technological gap is becoming undeniable. Just look at this candid admission from a Russian drone facility director. We have lost our lead over the past 6 months. This isn't just some technical observation, it's an open acknowledgement that the old-school advantages of size and heavy armor are being completely neutralized by agile, unmanned innovation.
And this innovation isn't stopping at the front lines, it's striking deep inside Russia. Recently, a historic 600-drone swarm penetrated Moscow's supposedly impenetrable fortress airspace. When Ukraine struck the Elma Technopark and Angstrom facilities in Zelenograd, they weren't just hitting random buildings, they were hitting the literal brain of the war machine, crippling the microchip production lines that Putin desperately needs for his smart weapons.
Between this massive loss of technical expertise and the literal exhaustion of the infantry, the Kremlin is rapidly running out of ways to maintain its offensive momentum.
So, with the myth of the impenetrable fortress fading fast in Eastern Europe, how exactly are other nations adapting to this massive drone revolution?
Let's move to Section 3, the cardboard fleet, and look at the Pacific Rim, where Japan is directly applying Ukraine's battlefield lessons to their own defense doctrine.
$2,000. It's a shockingly low price tag, right? See, Japan is currently facing a massive demographic crisis. They simply don't have the young personnel to endlessly staff giant warships anymore. So, to offset this and to counter China's rapidly expanding navy, Tokyo is leaning heavily into incredibly cheap, autonomous solutions that take human operators completely out of the equation.
Specifically, Japan is pouring resources into the Air Kamui 150 drones. These are, essentially, flying waterproof cardboard boxes with an 80-minute flight time. Sure, they can carry small explosives, but their real strategic value, acting as a massive swarm of radar decoys. When hundreds of these simple cardboard boxes approach a fleet, they can completely overwhelm billion-dollar air defense radars, creating absolute chaos for the enemy's targeting systems.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core concept of expendable warfare. It's a military doctrine where cheap, unmanned systems are willingly, deliberately sacrificed just to exhaust the enemy's expensive ammunition. Japan is intentionally investing in disposable systems because, think about it, every cardboard drone the enemy shoots down means they just wasted $1 million missile that might take months to replace. It's just simple, brutal math.
On to Section 4, the asymmetric pivot in the Middle East. Let's head over to the Strait of Hormuz to see how Iran is responding to massive tactical losses. For years, Iran held an asymmetric dominance in this region by using thousands of cheap sea mines to threaten global oil traffic. However, recent data from U.S. Central Command shows that the U.S. military has systematically destroyed 90% of the 8,000 sea mines Iran possessed. This swift destruction basically collapsed their long-standing maritime doctrine in the strait overnight.
This massive loss of physical sea mines forced Tehran to rapidly pivot. If they can't control the water, well, they're turning to the sky. Iran has shifted its reliance heavily toward massive swarms of Shahed 136 drones and ballistic missiles, applying that exact same expendable swarm logic to try and overwhelm highly advanced, incredibly expensive air defense systems like the Patriot. But here's the catch. Even these drone stocks are slowly depleting under constant pressure, placing immense economic and diplomatic strain on the country. Our sources outline that Iran now faces three distinct strategic paths at this crossroads: a highly unlikely full surrender, a control retreat to minimize losses, or a final, risky escalation. It's a tense holding pattern dictated entirely by the math of their remaining expendable munitions.
Which brings us to Section 5, the expendable warfare era. Let's synthesize everything we've seen from these three global theaters.
The reality of modern combat is perfectly distilled in this powerful quote from our sources. Quantity has begun to overwhelmingly defeat quality with its own mathematical certainty. Whether we're talking about FPV drones in Ukraine, cardboard swarms in the Pacific, or Shahed drones in the Middle East, the era of shiny million-dollar weapons ruling the battlefield unchallenged is rapidly fading. The math simply favors the cheap and the plentiful.
The big question now is, what's left for traditional military superpowers? For someone like Putin, a full mobilization would be political suicide, and his current recruitment drive is failing to keep up with the drones. The myth of the impenetrable fortress is fading, not just on the front lines, but in the minds of the Russian people, who are watching their soldiers get sent into a 12-minute survival lottery. But I really want to hear from you. Do you think Russia and other heavy militaries will be forced into a controlled retreat to save what's left of their armies? Or will they double down on a final risky escalation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to stay on top of these shifting global power dynamics, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Also, for those of you on the go, you can find our full analyses over on Spotify. Thanks so much for watching Global Power Pulse, and we'll see you in the next one.